next up, we have the sequel to Fright Night Part 2 from 1988, which follows Charley Brewster 3 years after the events of the first movie. He's gone through a bunch of therapy, as you can imagine, and he has come to the conclusion that he didn't actually see vampires, he just saw a serial killer, and the vampires are sort of his imagination going wild. But then, of course, more vampires come in, and he's sort of like, oh hey, there's more vampires. And with the help of Peter Vincent, who he hasn't spoken to in quite some time, they work together again to try to prevent the dangers of this new vampire group. It's like a group of, like, I think 4 vampires. And he also has a new girlfriend because they threw out the first one. And this one's a lot more attractive, so well done, Charlie.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was one of my points. Girlfriend, hot. Way better than Marcy. What was her name? Marcy and Amy. Sorry.
Yeah, Amy.
I know her as Marcy from Married with Children.
Amy was. I thought Amy was decent. I had no problems with Amy, but that was that was until I saw Alex, played by Tracy Lind, and she is certainly quite the shall we say, seductive. Well, she's hot. She's a
very nice.
Yeah. So this is a sequel which I had not seen until I watched it. I think, let's say, 5 days ago, and mainly because that's due to the fact I really enjoyed the first Fright Night. The first Fright Night might be in my top 5 favorite vampire movies. And I was worried that this sequel might somewhat ruin my perception of the series. And I will say that this sequel did a lot better than I thought it was going to. There's a lot of things I didn't necessarily love, but I did appreciate about this sequel. I don't think it's nowhere near as good as the first movie, but it's a decent follow-up, and if they had changed a few things, I probably would have liked it just a bit more. But it's a decent movie. But before I get to my nitpicky issues with this, what did you think about this one?
Yeah, pretty much the same. Like you're saying, the original Fright Night is one of the best vampire movies out there. I'm not a huge vampire guy, and I consider it to be definitely one of my top choices. And this one, look, it's definitely not as good as the first one overall. And I feel like if this was its own original movie, it probably wouldn't stand even close. But it borrows enough of the style from the original movie, like some of the ways the vampires are and the music, and it's got enough returning characters from the first movie, at least the two of the main characters. So there's enough that it borrows from the original to help keep this one interesting. Like, Chris Sarandon was definitely a more memorable character than the woman in this one, who's kind of playing the evil vampire this time. But, there was some interesting vampires, I guess. One with a moth-eating fetish, and one guy with mutton chops. It was pretty entertaining, I guess, on some level. And, like I said, hot girlfriend.
So, yeah, I think one of the things about this movie is that I really appreciated was a lot of the music has a very similar, quality 80s vibe that I like in these types of movies. They bring back one of the tunes from the first movie, and they change it up a little, they throw in some lyrics, but it's still a nice little touch to the movie. Another thing that I want to mention positively before I talk about my issues with the movie, I thought the special effects here were overall pretty solid, especially toward the end during the fight with the multiple vampires. There's some really good special effects here that I didn't necessarily expect to see.
Yeah, and hey, you also get a small vampire bowling montage as well.
Yeah, actually, that's one of my problems. So this movie has a bit more of a comedic influence. It's not like it's overbearing, and there's a little comedy in the first movie, to be sure, but this movie falls a little more heavy on the comedic influences, such as a extraordinarily pointless bowling scene And there's also one of the vampires just going around on roller skates for some reason. I just and that one guy, the one with the mud and traps, that guy just bugged me pretty much throughout the whole movie.
Hey dude, I'm not thirsty.
Now, I did like one of the guys, vampires, I think it was the moth-eating guy, was played by an actor named Brian Thompson, who had a face I recognized, and it took me maybe about 10 minutes to realize that he plays a character in the X-Files, which is a series that I have seen quite a few episodes of, so that's a nice little surprise. It doesn't change much because I don't think his character is really expanded upon here, but it's interesting. And also another note, there's a psychiatrist in this movie who there's a little twist involving his character which I hated, and that also struck me as somewhat pointless. So it's it has a lot of decent things going forward. You have obviously Roddy McDowall coming back as Peter Vincent, and obviously Tracy Lynn does a spicy jalapeno, but yes, but there's also like not necessarily big, but a bunch of things that I feel like they could have done without. And one of the I guess I should also say this, I never liked the whole group of antagonists type thing. I know that technically there's 2 people in the first movie, but there's only 1 vampire, and I thought that was an interesting element. Here there's 4 vampires, and that sort of takes out some of the charm, especially since none of these vampires are anywhere near as close as interesting as Chris Sheridan was in the first movie. I mean, the main woman has a little character, and she did do that fantastic intro to Fright Night, which, on a side note, that was a really long intro for a show like that. But hey, I guess if they had to replace the host, they had to replace the host.
Yeah.
The best scene was in the state institution.
The best scene is anytime Tracy Lynn's on the camera. Yeah.
And we might be beating the dead horse or beating something, but
I'll be beating.
you cannot overstate just how otherworldly attractive she is. She is. To be honest, I don't even know the actress. It's a name that sort of I recognize, but it's not a name I recognize from anything I've seen. So it's I do find that interesting. I was expecting her to be maybe a bit of a more well-known actress, but apparently not so much. But she is I think she does pretty good in this movie too, as far as her performance is concerned. So I do think it's definitely interesting. I'm probably going to throw this one. Let me double check something very quickly.
You're gonna check what you gave the first.
Well, yeah, I think I gave the first one either an 8 or an 8.5, something like that. Probably an 8.
You might have even gave it a 9.
Oh, I'm not. I'm going to quickly double check that because it seems like. Let's see. Oh, actually, my apologies. I did round it up to a 9. 8.5 rounded up to a 9. So I did like some of what this movie did. I especially liked Peter Vincent's character because he has sort of issues with his cowardice, and he sort of tries to overcome that in this movie, and I enjoyed that. But there's just some small issues, the comedic thing, the group of vampires, the pointless dactyl tryst thing, which I don't really think brought anything to the movie. I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. I do think it did better than I ever expected it to do, but I still thought it was probably a bit below average. But that said, if you enjoyed the first movie, I don't see a good reason not to go out of your way to see this one.
Wow, 6. That's actually a lot lower than I was expecting.
I am sorry to disappoint.
Okay. Look, I did consider somewhere between a 6 and a 7, but I think I'm going to go with a 7. Like I've been saying, it borrows enough from the original that you can still enjoy it on some level. And look, overall, it's not a bad movie, even if it didn't have those things carried over from the original. But it's definitely not as good. Chris Sarandon is just way more memorable than anything in this movie. It just doesn't get there. But we do have Tracy Lynn.
Yes.